This is a Fox News Alert. I'm Bret Baier in Washington. We're coming to you tonight from our special set ahead of this evening's presidential address. That speech begins in about 3 hours. The president says it will focus on the central planks of his campaign and will be a speech of optimism and unity. This afternoon, we learned the president may actually push for comprehensive immigration legislation from Congress. We have Fox team coverage tonight. Mike Emanuel's on Capitol Hill with a Republican-controlled Senate seemingly divided over some of the Trump agenda items. But we start off with Chief White House correspondent John Roberts and a preview of what we'll be hearing tonight. Good evening, John.
Bret, good evening to you. I'm expecting to get excerpts from the speech sometime in the next 5 to 10 minutes, I'm told. The president will cover a lot of ground in a speech that's expected to run about 45 minutes on paper. That does not include applause breaks, so it could go far longer than that. And the big headline tonight is that the president will broach tonight one of the thorniest issues in American politics, immigration reform.
All I can do is speak from the heart and say what I want to do.
President Trump is expected to say tonight that, quote, the time is right for an immigration bill as long as both sides are willing to compromise. No details at this point, though the president is said to be open to a possible path to legal status for many of the millions of people in the country illegally and a potential path to citizenship for the so-called dreamers, children brought to the U.S. illegally by their parents. The overarching theme of President Trump's speech tonight is a renewal of the American spirit. While he'll be addressing lawmakers, he plans to speak directly to all Americans, laying out real solutions for real problems facing real people. The president will focus on improving the economy, job creation, and health care reform that will be affordable and sustainable. But the president's proclamation on health care today,
we have a really terrific, I believe, health care plan coming out,
appeared to be contradicted by the Senate Majority Leader just hours later.
We're not there yet. There's a lot of discussion about how to craft that, what combination of legislation and regulation will get us to where we want to get.
The big ticket item in tonight's speech, President Trump's plans to add $54 billion to the Pentagon budget, a figure Senator John McCain insists still falls short.
It could be actually $30 million, $30 billion more than that. We're going to upgrade our military very substantially.
To fund the increase, the president plans to slash other discretionary spending, taking specific aim at the State Department, an idea Senate Republicans say may be a non-starter.
I, for one, just speaking for myself, think the diplomatic portion of the federal budget is very important, and you get results a lot cheaper frequently than you do on the defense side.
But the president says he may not need to take an axe to the budget to give more to the Pentagon.
Well, I think the money's going to come from a revved up economy. I mean, you look at the kind of numbers we're doing. We were probably GDP of a little more than 1%. And if I can get that up to 3 or maybe more, we have a whole different ballgame. It's a whole different ballgame.
President Trump has pledged not to touch Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, that a revved-up economy can pay for those entitlements as well. Though the House Speaker said today long-term entitlement reform is a must to balance the budget, that he hasn't yet given up on that dream.
I'd never give up a dream. Entitlement, by the way, 2 entitlements are being reformed with repealing and replacing Obamacare right now.
And the president's call for immigration reform comes with some curious timing because tomorrow he's expected to sign his replacement executive order on the so-called immigration ban, which no doubt will invite an avalanche of criticism from the very Democrats he hopes to bring on board for his plans for immigration reform. And Bret, as soon as we get those excerpts tonight for the speech, we'll send up a flare.
All right, John Roberts live on the North Lawn. John, thank you. Now let's go inside the building behind me, Capitol Hill. It's a rainy night up here on the Capitol. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel to tell us what he's hearing ahead of tonight's big speech.
The news President Trump wants to add tackling immigration to an already big-ticket agenda reached top Senate lawmakers this afternoon. The Senate's top Democrat pushed back, while the Senate Majority Leader sounded cautious.
We're all interested in what the president has to say on immigration, and if he's got an idea, we'd be happy to take a look at it.
He's got a lot to undo. I mean, the immigrant community is rightfully scared of what President Trump has done.
Earlier, House Speaker Paul Ryan said this evening gives the president an opportunity to make his case.
It is a chance for the country to hear directly from him about our agenda and about how we intend to improve people's lives.
Ryan and McConnell met with the president late yesterday, and McConnell today spoke of their ambitious agenda.
We need to leave Obamacare in the past and replace it with common sense reform so we can bring relief to the middle class. We need to make regulations smarter so we can get the economy moving. We need to make taxes simpler so we can create more jobs.
On tax reform, Senate Republicans have expressed concerns about a border adjustment tax in the House proposal. Today, General Motors CEO Mary Barra said that border adjustment could be problematic if it isn't done properly. And on health care, some key conservatives, House Freedom Caucus Chairman Mark Meadows and Republican Study Committee Chairman Mark Walker, have expressed concerns with the plan the White House and congressional leaders are fine-tuning. And there's a suggestion some conservatives are posturing, perhaps seeking greater input.
You're going to have a lot of churning in any kind of legislative product like this. This is a plan that we are all working on together, the House, the Senate, and the White House. So there aren't rival plans here. We're all working on this together with the administration.
Democrats oppose much of the new agenda, but say they do not have plans to disrupt tonight's address.
As much as we have nothing in common with the president, we do respect the office of the presidency.
And Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer continued his preemptive strike on the president's actions not matching his rhetoric.
There is a yawning gap between what he says and what his administration actually does for working Americans. He talks like a populist, but governs like a pro-corporate, pro-elite, hard-right ideologue.
Democrats have been stalling confirming the Trump cabinet, with Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross confirmed just last night, and Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke up next. Hearings will be held next month for Judge Neil Gorsuch's confirmation to sit on the Supreme Court.
Top congressional Republicans say this president must be successful in order for the country to do well. And despite some early resistance, they continue to maintain there is a big opportunity to get things done. Bret?
Mike Emanuel, live on the Hill. Mike, thank you. Let's talk more about what we can expect tonight. Syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer is back in our bureau. Charles, I want to start with kind of the breaking news that we heard today. The president saying that the time is right, he thinks, for immigration legislation as long as both sides are willing to compromise. What do you make of that?
I think that is huge news. That means that we can interpret all of this over-the-top stuff coming from the president on immigration from the day he announced the Mexican rapist speech as setting up a negotiation. If this is what he wants to do, he's the man who can do it. This is a Nixon to China kind of proposition, a guy who's been his hard line, has been accused of just about everything, talked about, border enforcement with people going around in trucks, deporting people. If this president proposes, and you can see from his earlier indication when it comes to the dreamers, the young people brought here as children, he wants to legalize them. That would be the starting point. And then you get to the point, what do you do with the others who are not criminals? The deal has been waiting now for years and years. The Republicans would offer that, which is an enormous concession, but only if the Democrats support airtight, strong border security, and that means not just a fence or a wall or border security at the border, but things like a system to verify citizenship inside the country and a visa tracking program. If you get that, you can get a national consensus and put the immigration issue behind us.
I mean, it's pretty amazing if you think about what we heard on the campaign trail and what we're hearing now, and potentially what we're hearing tonight in this speech. The senior administration official saying that it could be a path to legalization, not citizenship for all illegal immigrants, but that a path to citizenship would be possible for the dreamers.
Well, that's exactly right, and that's exactly logical. And what it means that if you can get the agreement, the problem over time will disappear with the changing of the generations. I think if you came over illegally with children, you don't deserve to be a participant in the political system. Yes, we'll give you the rights to stay and to work and all that, but the citizenship will go to your children who were raised here. And over a generation, the problem ends up behind us. Look, Nixon made his reputation elected to the Senate by being incredibly anti-communist and anti-Chinese. He went to China. He's the only guy who could do it. Anybody else would have been called a collaborator and worse. If Trump wants to propose this, I think it will be a breakthrough.
But why stop there, Charles? I mean, if you get to that point and this president is thinking like that, is it possible that this president gets something like Simpson Bowles across the finish line? That this president starts thinking big in those terms where, you know, long-term entitlements, not retirees now or anytime soon, but long-term entitlements and in the budget are all factored in?
I think that will be the key question on which it's a little early to talk about a president's legacy a month in, but that could be where it hinges. If he could be the one, and I don't know whether he can, because he's actually spoken very strongly and, if you like, from the heart on entitlements. That's been his appeal, differentiated himself from other Republican candidates. Christie, for example, who said we got to get serious about entitlements. And, of course, the congressional Republicans with Paul Ryan, who see this as the holy grail, and they are right in seeing entitlement reform as the most important thing. But Trump has made this a principle of his. If this is, as with immigration, simply a negotiating position to end up with a grand bargain, where he gives on that, he gives on entitlement reform, then I think that could be historic. But on this one, I'm not sure he'd cross the Rubicon.
We will see what the speech looks and sounds like tonight, and we'll see you for post-analysis as well. Charles, as always, thank you. Well, what are you expecting from the president's address to a joint session? Let me know on Twitter, @Bret Baier. And by the way, thank you. We got to 1 million followers. Use the hashtag special report. And on Facebook, @Facebook.com/BretBaierSR. The president's choice to oversee the nation's intelligence operations got a grilling today during his confirmation hearing. That session comes as questions continue to swirl about the administration's relationship with Russia. And we continue to get mixed messages about whether there really is anything to investigate. Here's Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge.
So help you God. I do.
In his confirmation hearing for Director of National Intelligence overseeing the 16 intelligence agencies, former Republican Senator Dan Coats left no doubt that Vladimir Putin's Russia is a deepening threat.
Russia's assertiveness in global affairs is something I look upon with grave concern, which we need to address with eyes wide open.
On Russian interference in the U.S. election and alleged ties between President Trump's close associates and Russian intelligence, the senior Democrat urged Coats to follow the facts.
That this investigation will remain bipartisan and seek to be as transparent as possible and remain free of any political consideration, including interference from the White House.
And both Democrats and Republicans want Coats to provide underlying data for independent reviews.
Will you provide the raw intelligence and sourcing behind the intelligence community finished product and assessments?
I absolutely believe that is my responsibility.
At a private breakfast, the House Speaker said DNI James Clapper and former CIA Director John Brennan told him they found no evidence of collusion, cooperation, or communication with Moscow beyond former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn's contact with the Russian ambassador. At his weekly news conference, the Speaker reinforced his position.
This has been investigated. We've been investigating it, and we're going to continue to investigate just to make sure no stone is unturned.
Monday afternoon, the House Intelligence Committee leadership publicly disagreed on the Russia probe.
As of right now, we have no evidence, but we will continue to ask for evidence.
We need really to get a full debriefing on everything that the FBI has looked at. What have they investigated? And at this point, I'm not clear we're going to get that.
And while it's not routine for the FBI to comment on ongoing investigations, Schiff said FBI Director Comey must be more transparent because he set a precedent discussing the Clinton email probe in July.
It's insupportable for the Bureau to take the position we could talk about that. We can't talk about any investigation involving the Trump campaign.
And speaking to reporters, Attorney General Jeff Sessions said he would recuse himself from the Russia probe if it's needed, Brett.
Catherine, thank you. President Trump has made no secret that he intends to shake up U.S. foreign policy. We may, of course, hear more about that tonight. Correspondent Rich Edson reports. For more clues as to what the president may do, just follow the money.
Translating campaign rhetoric into spreadsheets, the Trump administration is proposing what it calls an America First budget. That means substantial cuts to foreign aid. And now Democrats, Republicans, and former military officers are fighting to preserve that spending.
Most of us who wore the uniform understand there's probably a need to enhance the defense budget. Got it. But what we're concerned about is to take this this tiny sliver of the federal budget and put a hacksaw to that at 30% cut just is both disproportionate and frankly extremely dangerous.
In a letter to congressional leaders and Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, retired Lieutenant General Daniel Chrisman and 120 other retired 3- and 4-star generals and flag officers write that development agencies, quote, are critical to preventing conflict and reducing the need to put our men and women in uniform in harm's way. The military will lead the fight against terrorism and on the battlefield, but it needs strong civilian partners in the battle against the drivers of extremism, lack of opportunity, insecurity, injustice, and hopelessness. The White House is proposing spending much less on the State Department and foreign aid, about a third according to various reports. The U.S. Agency for International Development says the government spent $40 billion in foreign aid in 2015, about 1% of all federal spending. That includes money to secure U.S. embassies, feed refugees, fight terrorism, promote democracy, and build infrastructure in developing countries.
We will be spending less overseas and spending more back home.
Despite the administration's intent, when asked whether the Senate would approve a budget that slashes State Department funding by a third, Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said,
probably not.
This morning, ahead of his meeting at the State Department, reporters asked Secretary Tillerson if he agreed with the administration's plan to cut department funding. He ignored the question. A department spokesman adds, quote, the department is working with the White House and OMB to review its budget priorities. The department remains committed to a U.S. foreign policy that advances the security and prosperity of the American people. The president's budget is only a proposal. Congress controls the spending. Negotiations between the White House, Congress, Democrats, and Republicans will ultimately decide how much the U.S. spends on foreign aid. Brett?
Rich, thank you. The FBI says it is investigating last week's shooting at a suburban Kansas City bar as a hate crime. Witnesses say the 51-year-old suspect shouted, "Get out of my country," at 2 Indian men before opening fire. One was killed, the other injured. The suspect is charged with murder and attempted murder. Up next, who is targeting Jewish facilities around the nation and why? First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 10 in Mobile, Alabama, as a vehicle slammed into members of a school band as the Gulf Shores Mardi Gras parade was beginning. 3 of the 12 people injured are said to be in critical condition. Officials say a 73-year-old man was driving the SUV. They say they do not believe the act was intentional and that so far there was no sign of drugs or alcohol. Fox 32 in Chicago, where public school officials say the academic year will end 3 weeks early unless the state provides enough funds to close a deficit and provide teacher pension fund relief. The governor has vetoed a bill to put $215 million into pension assistance. The district has instituted a spending freeze, program cuts, and furlough days. And this is a live look at Los Angeles from our affiliate Fox 11. The big story there tonight, the investigation into the crash of a small plane into 2 Southern California homes. Authorities say 3 people on the plane died and 2 were injured in the fiery crash Monday in Riverside. All 5 family members aboard were returning from a cheerleading camp at Disneyland. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back. Rainy Capitol Hill tonight. Scores of volunteers are helping clean up and restore a Jewish cemetery in Philadelphia today. The facility is the latest target in a series of attacks and threats against Jewish gathering places in recent weeks all across the country. Correspondent Laura Engel is following the story from New York tonight.
We are going to begin shortly the process of reunification.
Another wave of bomb threats called into Jewish day schools and Jewish community centers and offices across the country Monday sent adults and children into the streets to wait for law enforcement to give the all clear.
That's really scary to hear that there was a bomb threat.
Nearly 100 threatening calls of this nature have been made since January in over 30 states. All calls have been deemed hoaxes by law enforcement with no bombs. Some reportedly are robocalls. Others have a live person on the line, which has made it tough to determine exactly from where the calls are coming. Then there has been the vandalism at Jewish cemeteries in St. Louis and Philadelphia, where tombstones were overturned, grave sites desecrated. The director of the JCC Association of North America issuing a statement which reads, Actions speak louder than words. Members of our community must see swift and concerted action from federal officials to identify and capture the perpetrator or perpetrators who are trying to instill anxiety and fear in our communities. The White House condemned the threats.
The president continues to be deeply disappointed and concerned by the reports of further vandalism at Jewish cemeteries.
And while security is being ramped up in front of synagogues, Jewish cemeteries, and religious institutions nationwide, some in the Jewish community want to see more done.
We'd like to see a plan of action put in place, and this demands leadership, and it demands leadership from the top.
It's too early to tell if there's been an uptick nationally in these anti-Semitic crimes. The FBI tracks hate crimes in the U.S., but hasn't released its 2016 figures yet. The NYPD did, however, give us updated stats for New York City, reporting that as of Sunday, the number of anti-Semitic hate crimes has nearly doubled since this time last year. Brett?
Laura, thank you. Take a look at the markets. The Dow snapped its 12-day winning streak, losing 25 today. The S&P 500 was down 6, and the Nasdaq fell 36. Now for a chilling story for law enforcement officers from out west. 2 of them are facing internal investigations tonight for what many people would consider simply doing their jobs. Correspondent Dan Springer explains from Seattle.
It was a routine call for the Washington State Trooper, a collision here on Interstate 5 in Tacoma. One of the drivers involved was Armando Chavez. A standard check of his driver's license revealed a warning from Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Chavez was an illegal immigrant, convicted of felony drug trafficking and deported 4 times between 1996 and 2000. The trooper called ICE, who arrested Chavez at the scene. He's now at the Immigration Detention Center awaiting deportation. And the trooper, who has not been identified, is under investigation by his own department for possibly violating policy.
Our troopers aren't federal immigration officials, and they're there to protect the roadways, to ensure everyone on the roadways are safe.
It's the new hypersensitive gray area in which the men and women in blue now find themselves working. Sanctuary cities and states seem to want no cooperation with ICE, upending a century-old police ethos.
The good guys, they feel like the bad guys because either they're not getting support from above or the people are not coming to their defense.
It's also happening in Multnomah County, Oregon. The Sheriff's Department is investigating a deputy who called ICE to let them know an illegal immigrant facing domestic violence charges would be showing up at the courthouse. Back in Washington State, the Democratic governor defends protecting undocumented criminals from deportation.
There was not a federal criminal warrant for the arrest of this individual. He may have had a previous conviction, but that is very different than a federal criminal warrant.
ICE usually doesn't issue arrest warrants because deportations are an administrative process, not something to tie up in criminal courts.
I'm concerned that this administrative investigation of this trooper will have a chilling effect, not just on this trooper, but on other troopers and other law enforcement personnel.
Both the sheriff's deputy and state trooper are still working and getting paid while under investigation. Their fates being watched very closely by those who wear the badge and people on both sides of the deportation divide. Brett?
Dan Springer in Seattle. Dan, thank you. A high-level North Korean delegation came to Malaysia today. Diplomats want the Malaysians to turn over the body of the North Korean leader's half-brother who was killed earlier this month. Authorities say Kim Jong-nam was poisoned with a nerve agent. There are suspicions North Korean leader Kim Jong-un may have given the order for that assassination. North Korea is seeking to retrieve the body and get the release of one North Korean arrested in that case. Meantime, China and Russia have vetoed a UN resolution to impose sanctions on 21 Syrian individuals, organizations, and companies allegedly involved in chemical weapons attacks. Bolivia also voted no on the Western-backed resolution. The bill came following an investigation that concluded Syria was behind at least 3 attacks involving chlorine gas. German police raided dozens of sites today linked to a mosque frequented by the driver in last December's truck attack in Berlin. 12 people were killed and dozens more injured in that attack. A 24-year-old Tunisian citizen was killed by police 4 days later. Some 450 officers searched 24 locations today, including apartments, offices, and prison cells. No arrests were reported. U.S.-backed Iraqi forces are said to be closing in on Mosul's main government buildings as they seek to push ISIS out of the country's second largest city. But for the people who live there, the humanitarian conditions are said to be dire. Correspondent Connor Powell has the latest from our Middle East newsroom.
ISIS's grip on western Mosul continues to weaken as Iraqi forces push deeper into the militant-held city. Backed by U.S. airstrikes and American troops on the ground, Iraqi forces have taken control of several strategic spots in and around Mosul, including the airport and a key bridge into the city. We have been able to take control of all three fronts, this fighter says. We have killed many and seized their weapons and ammunition, while the rest fled. The fighting in Mosul also sending many of the some 700,000 civilians who have been without food and water for weeks, fleeing as well.
I fled because of hunger. I did not even have a handful of flour.
As Iraqi troops move deeper into the narrow streets of downtown western Mosul, the fighting is expected to become even more difficult. ISIS has had 2 years to dig in and have set mines and booby traps. But unlike previous battles against ISIS in the country, Iraqi soldiers are increasingly accompanied by U.S. ground forces. President Trump promised on the campaign trail that the rules of engagement would be relaxed if he won. And according to the U.S. commanding general in Iraq, beginning in November, American troops started to move closer to the front lines.
Secretary of Defense Mattis has also suggested restrictions on U.S. troops can be eased even further as the U.S.-led coalition begins to prepare to expand the fight against ISIS into neighboring Syria. Brett?
Connor Powell in our Middle East newsroom. Connor, thank you. Well, what do you expect to hear from the president tonight as this joint session speech gets underway? We'll preview that speech with the panel with some new excerpts when we come back.
When you're close to
all I can do is speak from the heart and say what I want to do. I'm going to try and bring people together. And the way you do that is through success. When I create jobs, when I create a health care plan that works as opposed to Obamacare, which does not work.
We expect him to deliver a bold, optimistic message to the American people. We have the opportunity to finally tackle big problems that have held us back for so long.
The Trump proposed budget, I think both Democrats and Republicans are going to run away from.
Most of us respect the office enough to not be so rude as to shout.
The president wants a standing ovation from the Democratic side of the aisle. He'll announce that he's going to release his taxes.
Some sights and sounds today as we get ready to hear the president in his first address. Joint session of Congress behind us on this rainy night on Capitol Hill. We're going to hear probably a lot about health care and immigration, national security. But one thing we didn't think we were going to hear about is a push for an immigration bill. Today, at a lunch with anchors, including myself, at the White House, President Obama said this: "The time is right for an immigration bill as long as both sides are willing to compromise." Let's bring in our panel. Fox News senior political analyst Brit Hume, A.B. Stoddard, associate editor at Real Clear Politics, editor-in-chief of LifeZette, Laura Ingram, and Steve Hayes, editor-in-chief of The Weekly Standard. There he is. Brit, what do you think?
Well, I'm fascinated to hear the details of policy he's going to lay out, but more than that, I'm interested in his tone tonight. You know, he's been so defiant, almost belligerent in some of what he's been saying. He's gotten into these dust-ups with the press and with others. How will he treat the Congress sitting before him as a whole? And how will he go about the task of trying to make it hard for Republicans and some Democrats to go against him and easier for them to go with him? That's a big part of his challenge tonight. I was commissioned to see how he meets it, if he meets it.
Laura, here is one Democrat on the issue of immigration on Neil Cavuto's show. Trust us, he was there. Congressman Gutierrez was there, but they're skeptical. Is the Republican Party skeptical when they hear this coming out about possibly, a path to legalization, possibly a path to citizenship for dreamers, and this mention of this immigration bill?
I think the problem for a lot of conservatives on the immigration issue is when everything was done concurrently, when there was a promise of border enforcement and also immediate legalization. And so we needed border enforcement first and then legalization once credibility was brought back on the border. I think the key thing of what he said to you today, Bret, was when he said, well, there's going to have to be compromise on both sides. Someone like a Luis Gutierrez, I don't think he's in the mood to compromise. They're driving this issue home with their base, and they think they can score a lot with their base on the issue of immigration, and they're going to use that as I would expect they would. But the president, I think, has got to. Bret's right. I mean, we've been playing smash mouth politics for about 4.5, 5 weeks. I think it might be a good time for him to say, I get that a lot of you are upset and concerned, and look, the right to protest is part of our First Amendment. I hope in a year from now you're going to look at me differently and this country differently, and I'm looking forward to showing you those results. I think that tone would be something that would be good to hear tonight.
Congressman Gutierrez just showed up on tape. Take a listen.
Okay.
I think our position is clear. Yes, we want to stop the deportation. We want to have a system of immigration that allows people to come legally to the United States. When we have dreamers that are being threatened and one has already been deported from the United States. Look, Neil, I want to work with the other side, but we have to find a common ground in order to do that.
So, Steve, is there common ground? Is this unity optimism pitch that we're hearing from the White House and the president a possibility tonight?
Sure, I think there's common ground. I mean, we talked about this last week. I mean, I think one of the things we said was he was likely to come out and position himself as very tough on deporting criminal aliens on the wall and then seek a broader compromise. I think that still holds true. It's a very different tone than we heard from Donald Trump during the Republican primaries. I mean, remember some of the heated exchanges that he had with Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz and others. He's casting a different argument right now. Whether he'll be successful to selling it, I think, is anybody's guess at this point. I would guess that Luis Gutierrez is probably not going to be among those working with Donald Trump on a compromise.
Okay, let's talk Obamacare. Here is the Speaker of the House and a Democratic response about repeal and replace.
You're going to have a lot of churning in any kind of legislative product like this. This is a plan that we are all working on together, the House, the Senate, and the White House. So there aren't rival plans here. When we get everything done and right, we're going to be unified on this. The Democrats have made it very clear with us that they don't have any interest in repealing Obamacare. The Democrats want to go down with the sinking ship.
They've touched it now. They now own it. What they do with it, how it moves forward, is on their back. We have stood ready to improve the act. We still stand ready to improve the act.
Listen, AB, the White House says they're close to a bill. The Speaker says they're all singing from the same sheet of music. They're not.
No, they're not.
There's some different keys in there.
Yeah. President Trump, since he took office, has promised several times that they're almost at the very last stages of the final drafting of something very, very special. The problem today is that the draft that the Republicans came up with, no surprise their very first one was torpedoed by within their own ranks, and the leadership actually had to come out to say it's no longer a viable option. So there's no consensus. The Medicaid expansion is an enormous part of this. The governors were there this weekend with Trump telling him, you can't do this to us. We've got to find a middle way. They don't want a block grant of Medicaid. So there's all these huge parts that have not begun to be dealt with. And this is why something like an immigration compromise gives them fever, because they are trying to roll the boulder up the hill right now. Tax reform and health care reform, if they could do one of those before the midterms, they'd be lucky. Trying to do both, they don't want to invite another divisive battle.
This is why, Bret, that I think that the cries that you're hearing that it can't be done and it won't be done are premature. These are huge, as AB points out, legislative undertakings, both of them. And I would have been amazed, having covered this place for all these years, if by this time in Trump's new presidency, we had agreement on either one of them or really anything close to it. I mean, this place, for all that's said about it being separate from the rest of the country, is really the political intersection of America. This is where the interests and the views of people from all over the country come together. And if you expect agreement on these two subjects quickly, you're looking in the wrong place.
And Laura, I just want to point out that, you know, for Nancy Pelosi, the House Minority Leader, to come out and say there hasn't been a jobs bill yet and there hasn't been all of this stuff yet, they're just getting cabinet. The entire cabinet has not been approved yet. And so what is the leeway here that the Trump administration gets a little breathing room to get their sea legs?
Yeah, I think that Donald Trump should talk about that tonight. So look, I'm willing to work with everybody here tonight, but you got to let me put my team in place. I mean, you can't get everything done legislatively on Capitol Hill that you need to get done if you don't have your soldiers ready to go domestically on the fields. We're going to try to implement that policy and work with Capitol Hill. I'd also say I talked to a top Republican today after I was on Fox and Friends, and he said, this is the test for us on Capitol Hill, whether we're only good in opposition or whether we can really govern. We haven't seen them really govern since before 2006 when they lost one chamber of Congress, of course. So we'll see now if they can do the hard job of governing. It takes some compromise, and you know, a lot of us don't like to compromise on these big issues, but to get things done, you're going to have to compromise on some of it.
Steve, one of the team members who is in place is Secretary Price, HHS, and one of the powers or tools he has is regulatory. Just because the bill is so complex, the law allows the HHS secretary to have a lot of leeway. Well, it can work in reverse, too, and he can start unwinding some of those regulations for Obamacare.
Right, and this is a huge debate on Capitol Hill right now. There are a lot of conservatives who think he should start moving. This is happening. Republicans have been promising repeal and replace now since Obamacare was passed. If they don't do this and they don't do it right, it's going to be a huge political problem in addition to a policy problem. And this is why I think this speech tonight has a potential to be so important for Donald Trump. If he, you know, usually it's the case he's speaking to the country, he's going to have tens of millions of people tuning in. You want to reach the country and reach beyond the people in the room. I actually think the most important people he has to speak to tonight are the Republicans in the room. And he's got to say to them, this is what we're going to do. I'm the president. We've got the majorities. Here's how we're going to do it. And if he gives them that kind of a path, I think he's much more likely to see cooperation from Republicans. If he doesn't, we're going to continue to see what's been sort of a free-for-all, and I think then his legislative agenda starts to be at risk.
Over under that he stays on the script?
I don't do that kind of bet, Brett. I'm too wrong about the things I know a lot about, and I'm not going to chance it on something I can't foresee.
AB, does he spend a lot of time on specifics?
We are told he's not going to get specific on Obamacare. That's really tough for Republicans. They wanted to come out of here with something to sell. They are so sick of these town halls and not having any answers. They really wanted some details. They want him to get behind their plan or talk about some path forward, specifics on tax reform, but particularly on Obamacare, which they have to do first. And we're told that he's not going to be getting specific. And it'll be interesting about the teleprompter. If he's foil-free tonight and doesn't actually talk about the media, that will really be, I think, a breakout moment.
Tone different than the inauguration and other speeches?
I think there'll be a little bit of a change in tone, and I think it's time.
You're the guy that really ought to be asked that question, Brett, because you among us are the one that had a chance to talk to him today.
Yeah.
What can you say?
Well, I will just say that there was this presentation that it was going to be optimistic and that he was going to focus on unity and trying to find common ground. He also said we have a lot of problems, and he's not going to shy away from that.
How is his tone, though?
But he's optimistic. I mean, he works the room.
What about the familiar bombast? Was that all there?
Not really. Not really. And the interactions with the media answered every question.
He wants to be popular. I mean, he's a populist. He wants to be popular.
The immigration thing came out of nowhere. And everyone said, wait a second, what?
Yeah, well, how are the staff at the White House with that? I might play some calls. I'm not sure people are all, we're ready for that tonight.
It was interesting to see. All right, next up, more questions about the Trump administration and Russia. What's happening with all that?
We have have an ongoing investigation. I'm not going to get ahead of that investigation. We have seen no evidence so far based upon the investigations that have already been conducted. Remember, there was an intelligence community investigation last year. This has been investigated. We've been investigating it, and we're going to continue to investigate just to make sure no stone is unturned.
I don't think that any of us on the Intelligence Committee should reach any conclusions about the evidence yet because, frankly, we have heard from no witnesses. We have only started reviewing documents.
Well, the Russia investigation and the alleged ties to the administration, where is that? Is there any there? We're back with the panel. Steve, I had a busy day. I had breakfast with the Speaker of the House, and he said that that investigation he was referencing was DNI, former Director of National Intelligence Clapper, and CIA Director Brennan did a full scrub, according to the Speaker of the House, from November to December. They turned it over and briefed lawmakers and found no collusion, no cooperation, no communication outside of Michael Flynn with the Russian ambassador. He was kind of definitive about it.
Right. Now, I talked to FBI officials over the past several days who have said that this is one of the reasons that the administration has been so frustrated, is that they have had these investigations. According to these FBI officials, current and former, they haven't turned up anything definitive. They haven't pointed at any leads. And that's why the White House is eager to have some people out there making that argument. Now, I think we can look back on what Mike Flynn did and say that he used poor judgment, certainly with respect to the Russia Today event, the speeches. But for Democrats to continue to capitalize on this, at some point they're going to have to come up with something harder than the circumstantial evidence that does exist. I mean, there are real questions about why Donald Trump had the position he had with respect to Vladimir Putin throughout the campaign. That is far different than saying that he was in collusion with the Russians to defeat Hillary Clinton, which is the allegation that some Democrats are making.
Let's not forget, Brett, that we've had a very prominent journalist, Tom Friedman of the New York Times, say that we were attacked on 9/11 and at Pearl Harbor and on Election Day, meaning I can't imagine what else he meant if he wasn't talking about by the Russians' interference in our election. It should be said, by the way, that there was interference perhaps in the campaign, no evidence of interference in the election. And as Stephen, you have just pointed out, there's really been no evidence that there's anything improper communication between the Trump people and Russia before the election. And I have a feeling that when we get down to the bottom of this rabbit hole, they're not going to find anything.
So I guess, AB, the question is, I mean, there have been ominous headlines, there have been ominous stories out there about this alleged tie. But then if there is nothing there, why does the investigation and the push for the investigation continue in such earnest way by senior Democrats?
Well, first of all, there are Republicans who want to investigate the interference in the campaign, as Britt said, but not on Election Day, not with the balloting, but with the campaign. As long as you have Republicans like Senator Roy Blunt of Missouri saying, you know, we're going to
get to the bottom of it.
This to the end. As long as you have people like Congressman Darrell Issa of California saying this really should be, you know, taken over by a special prosecutor.
He did walk that back a little bit.
But then he doubled down again, actually, after the walk back. So it gives Democrats fuel. And as long as they have Republicans in cahoots with them saying it needs attention, it will get attention from the Democrats, like Congressman Schiff saying, we haven't begun to talk to witnesses or getting tested.
ICE's statement was that he wanted it done so that it could be completely taken off the table and cleared. A special investigator.
But the idea that it needs to be done independently so that all Americans can trust the process infers that it's not undergoing a trustworthy process. This is kind of all the Democrats have right now. I mean, if it's not Russia that delivered the election to Donald Trump, what was it? Was it the fact that they've missed the angst and the anxiety of middle America on key issues in key ways for the last several years? Was it they had a candidate who really didn't connect with the electorate? Was it their own turnout machine? What was it? I mean, anything except reflect on their own, in my view, failures in seeing what was happening among the electorate. Russia makes it a lot easier for the Democrats not to do their own autopsy on what went wrong. And I understand everybody, you know, doesn't like how Trump addressed Putin, and I would have rather him said something else as well. But the idea that that's what gave this election to Donald Trump, which they're still beating on every liberal website, on every left-wing blog, and at the other cable network we just ran the clip from, That is what they're talking about almost 24/7.
I will say on national security issues, and we will hear a section of this speech that deals with a lot of those, but senior administration officials at the White House identified North Korea as by far the most dangerous situation that the U.S. faces right now. Steve?
Yeah, I think there have been some briefings both on Capitol Hill and at the White House over the past couple of weeks that have raised the alarms on North Korea, in addition to the behavior that we've seen, the increasingly risky behavior or troubling behavior that we've seen from North Korea. I think it's a reasonable case to think that that's a key threat, but you can't, I mean, how many are there? ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Iran. I mean, there are so many threats. It's one of the reasons I think that you have intelligence officials on edge the way that they are.
President Trump talked yesterday, Britt, to the Chinese, and obviously sees China as a linchpin to solving or at least helping solve the North Korean situation.
Yeah, and there's a sequence of events here. You remember he raised the question of whether he would go along with the familiar one China policy. He eventually took that off the table. In the meantime, China, for the first time in a long time, slapped some very serious sanction on North Korea in reaction to what it's been doing lately by saying it was no longer going to buy coal from North Korea. That is huge for the North Korean economy and represents a major step. So, you know, he may be getting somewhere in dealing with the Chinese. Something to hope for, I guess.
Panel, thank you. Look forward to the speech and analysis afterwards. Back with final thoughts after one last break.
Did you know that silver...
We are just getting started here in Washington tonight. You know, we didn't get the excerpts from the speech. We were expecting to this hour. And by the way, I know it's President Trump, not President Obama in that first panel. It's a busy day. Make sure you stick around all night for coverage of President Trump's address to a joint session of Congress. I'll be right back here, 8:50 p.m. to take over coverage alongside Martha McCallum. After the president wraps up, the all-star panel will offer some analysis, plus some newsmakers will join us from Capitol Hill, including Texas Senator Ted Cruz, obviously also a GOP candidate. Thanks for inviting us into your home tonight. That is it for the special report. It's fair, balanced, and unafraid. A little rainy, but still unafraid. The first 100 days, hosted by Martha McCallum, starts right now.